Early Summer by Jan MacLean. Chapter 1. The landlord, handing her the key, explained again. "I wish I could come with you, but I'm expecting a long-distance phone call, so I'd better not leave." Doubtfully, he added, "The house is quite isolated, Miss McCourt. You may not like it. There's a summer cottage on one side, but that's empty now, and your nearest neighbour to the south is about 3/4 of a mile away, and a bit of a stickler for privacy at that." Erin clutched the key firmly, inwardly rather pleased that she should see the place alone for the first time. Choosing where she should live for the next year seemed a momentous decision to her, and one she would be better able to make without the company of the garrulous Mr. Stone. Pleasant though he was with his portly frame and kindly eyes under bushy white brows. "Well," she temporized, "I'll have a look at it and let you know what I decide within a couple of hours. Is that all right?" He nodded, again surveying her slender frame in its youthful jeans and open-necked shirt. "There's a phone in the house, of course, but you may not care to be so far away from other people, a little bit of a thing like you. If you decide not to take it, I know my sister-in-law in town can fix you up at a boarding house. That would be much more suitable." Annoyed that he should consider her totally helpless simply because she was a woman, Erin smiled goodbye and left quickly before he could change his mind. Little did he know how much she longed to be away from other people, she thought wryly, as she turned her car back on the main road that led into Abbotsford. She was on the crest of a hill, the little maritime town spread beneath her, its multi-hued clapboard houses scattered to the very edge of the cliffs along the shoreline, a cluster of them surrounding the shipbuilding industry, a conglomeration of sheds and warehouses and wharves. She could see the main street with its neat row of shops and business establishments, its red brick post office flying the Canadian flag. The streets were lined with trees, a white-painted church steeple piercing the crowns of the stately elms. A hill sloped gradually up from the town, and on it sprawled the grey stone buildings of Abbotsford College, where, in 2 days' time, Erin would start work in the fine arts department. Her stomach cramping with nervousness, she turned her attention beyond the town, where the rocks gave way to a pale crescent of sand and a forest of spruce. The house she was to inspect lay in that direction, she knew. She would go there first before exploring the town. Within 10 minutes she turned off the main road and steered her car down the narrow dirt track. When the house came into sight, she put on the brakes and with growing pleasure surveyed the scene before her. It was evening, and the sky was tinted with the rose and gold of sunset, the same hues colouring the mirror-like surface of the ocean. A solitary seagull flew past, mewing plaintively. The house, small and white-shingled, was nestled in a grove of dark, spiky spruce trees. Its lawn sloped steeply to the rocks, beyond which lay the beach. Erin turned off the engine and got out of the car. It was so quiet that she could hear the flutter of some small bird in the shrubs and the chirping of a cricket in the grass. The steady rhythm of the waves fell upon her ears, infinitely soothing. This was what she needed, this peace and solitude. Maybe here she could forget Peter, their broken engagement, her desperate, omnipresent loneliness. As though mesmerized, she walked past the house to the cliff's edge and knelt down, her fingers absently rubbing the weather-smoothed bark of a long-dead tree, as her blue eyes drank in the sweep of sand and sea. There was no one in sight, the beach stretching far into the distance in an unbroken curve except for a single wharf and jetty, with the sailboat moored offshore, curtsying gently on the swell. On impulse, she clambered down the rocks and jumped to the sand. Slipping off her sandals, she rolled up the legs of her jeans and wandered down the shore, letting the waves lap at her bare feet. Deliberately, she emptied her mind of both the unhappy past and the uncertain future, concentrating instead on the ocean's chill, the air's salt tang, the seagull's cry. Because she was so sure she was alone and hence unobserved, she began searching for flat rocks and childishly skipping them across the top of the water, grinning to herself when one hit the surface 12 times before finally sinking. And then, like a thunderbolt, a great black creature leaped out from behind a nearby clump of rocks and rushed at her. She cried out in fright, realizing too late to smother her fear that it was only a dog. A giant Newfoundland dog, plumed tail now wagging a friendly greeting as he loudly and thoroughly sniffed at her ankles. "You don't have to be afraid," a bored voice said, with an edge of contempt. "He's perfectly friendly and very well mannered. Sit, Robbie." The dog collapsed on his haunches, its huge tongue lolling across white teeth in a canine grin. Erin looked up, meeting the stranger's eyes. Stung by his tone, he said sharply. She said sharply, "He startled me. I'm not normally frightened of dogs." His look of disbelief caused her to add, "In fact, I love them." "Ah, so you're one of those sentimental females." "Ah, so you're one of those sentimental females who loves dogs," he said sardonically. "You needn't worry, I won't embarrass you, or him, by getting down on my knees and flinging my arms around him," she retorted crisply, annoyed by his air of lazy disdain. "I scarcely think that would embarrass me," he replied softly, allowing his rock-hard grey eyes to survey her from head to foot in a leisurely fashion that was subtly insulting. Erin felt a blush warm her cheeks and opened her mouth to speak, anything to distract him from his cool appraisal. It was almost as though he were mentally undressing her. She thought, a shiver rippling across her nerves. She fumbled to do up the top button on her blouse, knowing that the neckline was gaping open to expose her skin. For the first time, she wished her jeans were not quite so tight. Did not outline quite so faithfully the curve of her hips and slender length of her legs. Again, the painful colour mounted in her cheeks. "Here," she said. "Here," he said coolly. "Let me." He stepped closer, and before she could guess his intention, his fingers were brushing her throat as he did up the offending button. "How dare you!" she gasped, wanting to move away, yet paralysed by his nearness. "It's all right. I'm quite harmless," he answered dryly. "But a kid like you shouldn't be wandering on the beach alone at dusk, you know. Unless you're looking for trouble, that is." "I seem to have found it, whether I'm looking for it or not." To her chagrin, he merely smiled, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "No one's ever been able to accuse me of robbing the cradle." He glanced at her heaving breast. "Not yet, that is." Abruptly he added, with a resumption of an air of boredom so palpable that she felt as though she had been slapped, "I came here to be alone, so if you'll excuse me." "Come along, Robbie." With a brief inclination of his head, he turned on his heel and strode away from her, not once looking back. Trembling with reaction, Erin sank awkwardly down on a sharp-edged boulder, her emotions in a turmoil. Her heart was thudding in her breast, while her treacherous flesh persisted in reliving the cool touch of his hands on her neck, the forced intimacy of his gaze on her body. Even though she closed her eyes, she could not banish the vision of his mocking grey eyes piercing her fragile defences, nor forget how his big body had towered over hers. Yet as her anger and fright slowly subsided, and as the gathering darkness swallowed up his distant figure along the shore, she was left with one overriding impression. Whoever the stranger was, and whatever had been his motive in so disturbing her, he was not a happy man. Of that she was sure. Happiness had not carved those lines in his tan face, nor sprinkled his thick dark hair with grey. Because she had, during the past month, for the first time in her 22 years, experienced disillusion and pain and betrayal, she felt a rush of fellow feeling for the unkind stranger. She gave herself a little shake, compressing her soft lips. This was nonsense. The man was nothing to her, a stranger who would remain a stranger. She thrust him out of her thoughts, got to her feet and hurried back along the beach to the house, reaching for the key in her jeans pocket. It didn't take her long to look through the house. One bedroom, a cramped kitchen, a fairly spacious living room with a picture window overlooking the ocean, a tiny bathroom, and a den which would function admirably as a studio and work area. The whole place was clean and adequately furnished. It would do, she decided. She would complete the formalities with the landlord, spend tonight at a motel, and tomorrow move in with her belongings. And that was what she did. All the next morning she scrubbed and polished, letting the late summer breezes waft through the open windows to banish the slight mustiness. She put up curtains, placed her books on the shelves, and made a quick trip to town for groceries. And last of all she hung her pictures. oil paintings and watercolours given to her by friends, and her own exquisitely crafted photographs. But although she knew in her bones that this house by the sea was what she craved, and that the job at the college would suit her very well, yet she could not enjoy the first day in her new surroundings, and more than once abandoned what she was doing to go and stand by the window and more than once abandoned what she was doing to go and stand by the window, staring sightlessly at the distant horizon, her slim body tense and still. Her Irish ancestry was